So thanks y'all for joining us. Again, like I said, this is episode 5 of the People's Report. Y'all know we have these conversations to really get grounded in some of the issues that are happening both here locally in Winston and Forsyth County and around the country, right? And we're really blessed and honored to have folks from outside Winston and outside Forsyth County on this call with us tonight. So we're going to get started talking about defunding the police and refunding violence interruption and violence prevention programs, right? We know that folks are in the community doing this work, that the police do not actually have any interest in ending violence, right? Because that would put them out of a job. And so we need to talk to folks who actually do have an interest in making our community safer in the way that we want them to look. So we're going to get started with doing some introductions so y'all can get a sense of who's on this call before we jump into the conversation. So Brother Efren Muhammad, can you start first with just telling us who you are and some of the work that you've done in your community, please?
Yes, greetings. First of all, Sister Brittany, I thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to be a part of this discussion this evening. Of course, my name is Brother Efren Muhammad. I'm a student minister in the local Nation of Islam here in Winston-Salem. I'm also a facilitator of the Winston-Salem Local Organizing Committee, or LOC, which was established in 2015 to promote, organize, and mobilize for the 20th anniversary of the historic Million Man March. And when we came back with an action agenda, and we instituted that agenda through 9 ministries that we have set up, one of which is a ministry of education, a ministry of science and technology, a ministry of agriculture. These ministries are instituted to actually pull individuals from within our community together who have specific skills in those areas so that we are not dependent upon not dependent upon government, but pulling from community. And through the LOC, we initiated what we call peace walks, which is a grassroots strategy wherein we go into the communities around Forsyth County to see what we can do to encourage conflict resolution and work with empowering the community to address some of the systemic issues in the community. So that's the the shortened form of what it is I do. In another life, I do have 22 years of experience in mental health and behavioral health, community-based services. So once again, I'm excited to be a part of the discussion today with these wonderful kings that are on here today. And yourself.
Thank you. We jump to Brother Terrence. Can you introduce yourself for folks who might not know about the work that you're doing in Winston? You're muted.
My bad, rookie mistake. My name is Terrence. I'm a 4th generation Winston-Salemite. My formative years grew up on 26th Street. About 17 years ago, I cut my teeth as a community organizer coming out of the faith community. And since that time, I've done youth development work, justice and peace work in the city. Relevant to this conversation, in our youth development work, we started an initiative called Lit City back in 2011. And we work primarily with Black and Brown youth, their parents and their communities, doing mentoring, advocacy, sports and fitness, arts, music, and also leadership development. And then in 2014, my wife and I started a little ragtag collective of activists out of the faith community called Drum Majors Alliance. And we've been trying to push church folk into the work of justice and peace here locally. Those 2 efforts, I think, can be framed at least in part as peacemaking work. And so whether that, through the youth development means mentoring, building with gang affiliated or gang adjacent youth in our city for over the years, or that means trying to confront those systems with Drum Majors Alliance that traumatize and create conditions where the violence erupts, or that means simply living in our communities, living on Patterson, living on 26th Street, and being a good neighbor and trying to do de-escalation, whether that's, around self-harm, domestic violence, or gun violence. So that's really how my work is related to this conversation this evening. And wanted to say I'm honored to be on here with y'all, and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Brother Anthony Smith, can you talk about some of the work that you've been doing?
Sure. My name is Anthony Smith. I'm lead pastor, and I'm actually 2 counties over. I'm in Rowan County, North Carolina, based here in Salisbury. But I've done coalition work with Brother Terrence, Brother Efferwin over the past several years. And so I'm glad to be a part of this conversation that we're having today. Some of the initiatives I've been a part of, done work here with our local NAACP, taking some elements of the Cure Violence model with the Cure Violence initiative. It's still in this very incubation stage. We've done some kind of piloting of that here. Of course, it needs to be more complex, more elaborate. Also, I'm one of the lead organizers for a civic engagement group called Rowan Concerned Citizens. And the primary work that we've done is to do popular education, provide space for people to organize and mobilize around grassroots issues in our community. Also, part of the local expression of the Poor People's Campaign, same kind of work, just organizing, mobilizing people around justice, racial justice, ecological justice, around poverty, around various issues. And so a lot of the work primarily has been what I call faith-rooted organizing. And that is, along with Brother Terrence, to really kind of prod and push and provoke the religious community here, faith community, church community, into the realm of prophetic and social justice, prophetic work. And that's all I can really say right now. And I almost forgot, most importantly, a work that I've been very proud to be a part of, led by my dear brother, Reverend Timothy Bates, called the Night Crawlers. Brother Efferwin and his group, they've come down and hung out with us several times. And it's a presence ministry where we literally walk the streets on certain nights of the week, primarily on Fridays, where we establish relationships with young people, keep up with people, point people to resources in the community. The pandemic slowed that work down, but we've been talking about gearing things back up. But that's been a primary work. We've stopped all kind of incidents of violence in this community in advance of them happening. And so, yeah.
Appreciate that. Pastor Delonte, can you introduce yourself and tell us some of the work that you've been doing?
Sure. First of all, I just want to say thanks to each of you for what you've shared so far and for the kind introduction. I'm really encouraged because I feel like I'm with family for real this evening, encouraged by each of the testimonies and the fantastic work that's already been done. So I'm based here in Washington, D.C. As a pastor and an organizer. And so my work is primarily around the intersection of police accountability and gun violence reduction. And so that work really started when I was in seminary in LA, started kind of leaning in and showing up with Black Lives Matter in LA, where Black Lives Matter, the movement was started, and started organizing with some local faith-rooted organizers, formerly known as PICO. LA Voice is a local version of it. Now it's known as Faith in Action. So I was brought on after organizing for several years around police accountability in downtown LA and Skid Row in particular, to begin to try to build relationships between organizers and woke cops. So that was very challenging work at that particular time. And continues to be a challenge, of course, to this day for a variety of reasons. Now, for the last 3 years, I'm back home where I was born and raised, in the city where I was born and raised. My wife and family relocated here 3 years ago to lead a church. And we started organizing, really not because we wanted to, but because we had to, around the intersection of state violence and community violence. My nephew was almost killed. He was shot 5 times within a year of my moving back home. And so I don't know. I had to do something. So I started calling masjids and started calling local pastor friends who I knew growing up here in the city, And we organized, much like my brother Muhammad and the night crawlers that Brother Smith is doing. We organized what we now call Peace Walks DC. And Peace Walks DC it's a coalition of churches, faith communities, and survivors of gun violence that we walk the streets Friday nights. And we take with us partners from both nonprofit church community and leveraging some government resources. Specifically in DC, we have a Department of Behavioral Health that goes out with us. We have the Department of Employment Services that goes out with us to make referrals. And unlike some cities in the country, we actually organized to create what's called an Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, which is an entity that is separate from the police department that helps to collect data and do weekly calls around the violence and the supports that need to be put in place. And so we go out with some of their outreach workers as well. And it's been really impactful to hit the streets, but also to take the knowledge we gain to make our system work better and do the advocacy to build up even more resources. Really honored to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. So, I want to jump right to this idea of Black on Black crime, because whenever we have a conversation about violence or violence prevention or doing this type of work, and particularly when we're talking about shifting resources from inflated public safety and police budgets, right, to resources for the community, folks from all backgrounds, right, including folks from our own background, right, say, but what about Black on Black crime? They out here shooting each other, and really just painting this picture that, Black folks and young Black men in particular are just out here acting like savages, which we know to not be the case. So I want to first have y'all speak to that that myth, right, and that idea and the damage that does to both the work that you're doing, but also us being able to even, as a community, as a collective, as a country, being able to approach this work in a way that makes sense. So anybody that wants to jump in on that.
It's not true.
Right. Period. Right.
As much as we can trust government statistics, when we look at the FBI's most recent report around intra-racial violence, it happens at the same rate across racial groups. So when I drop that fact on folks, especially in my own Black community here, that mythology even travels in our own communities, even in Black communities. And so when I drop that and I give that link, people are like, oh, didn't know. I say, yeah. So I'll let the other brothers take, I know they got some really deep things to say about that. So.
Nah, man, you said it. I mean, look, it's just a myth. First of all, we need to know that anybody who's organizing at the intersection of state violence and intercommunity violence knows and believes that all Black lives matter, knows and believes that we are about, I'll speak for myself, I'm about the collective liberation of all Black people. And what that means is not only the liberation from the institutions of white supremacy and the slave catching, slave holding systems of state violence that we're fighting to free ourselves from, but we're also fighting a spiritual battle, a battle of spiritual warfare for the minds, hearts, and souls of a people who have been told for so long that you're worthless, who have been told for so long that your schools shouldn't be invested in, your community shouldn't be invested in, you shouldn't have any kind of health equity in healthcare, and we need to pack you up in the back of a squad car, in the back of a paddy wagon or a police van, and herd you up like animals, right? So if you've been told, since we're in Black History Month, right, let's talk about Carter G. Woodson for just a moment. In his Miseducation of the Negro, he puts it like this. He says, I'm paraphrasing, he says, if you build a house and you tell the Negro, in his language of his day, to go around to the back of the house, then when you build a new house, they will then demand that you build the house with a back door. All right, so let's just sit with that for just a minute, okay? So 50 years ago, 60 years ago, Dr. Woodson, more than that, 70 years ago, Dr. Woodson is identifying what is essentially internalized oppression. Once you've been told over and over again that you are worthless and valueless, when you look in the face of another black queen, king, prince, or princess, all you can see is what's around you, which is clear in our communities. Our communities look like and feel like we have no worth, we have no value. So therefore, what does it mean for us to engage around this issue of intra-community violence? It means we have to do the work of building up our sense of identity. For me, as a preacher of the gospel, that means primarily building up a sense of a person's identity in Christ, a person that is made in the image of God, who was made beautiful. So when we go out and when we do rallies and we do have protests, we are yelling, "Black is beautiful." We are shot. And the kids are in the street and they're like, "Yeah, that's right, Black is beautiful." And we singing, "Black is beautiful, Black is beautiful," right? In the same communities that where we also are stopping at the sites where we've lost loved ones and counting that ground as sacred ground, as holy ground. And so I would just say, yeah, what my brother Anthony said is absolutely, Reverend Smith is absolutely right. And the data just bears out that people who are traumatized or hurt just traumatize and hurt other people. White folk, 84% of white crime is done by white people. If you look within the brown and Latinx community, the same numbers exist. Sadly, if you look within queer LGBTQIA communities in terms of domestic violence and partner-on-partner violence, the numbers just bear up the same evidence. Why? Because if you're hurt, you tend to hurt. And so our goal is to get into the deep aspects of the wounds and heal the wounds there so that we can put a real stopgap around some of this violence.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to add, if I may, in terms of the myth, that there is a uniqueness to the nature of crime that does go on in the Black community. And I'll come back to that. But the myth part is that there is a myth rooted in in the ideology of white supremacy. Mm-hmm. And a part of that ideology tends to believe that Black people and brown people have a genetic predisposition towards aggression and violence. And it is that sick, perverted ideology that undergirded the concept of the super predator that became later policy that morphed into a crime bill. But that's a myth because there is no gene for violence in Black people, particularly Black males. But there were those who proposed that idea. However, in terms of the uniqueness, much of what goes on in our communities is socially engineered, right? Mm-hmm. So, of course, there are structural reasons for crime and violence. As I think it was pointed out, much of the violence is based on proximity. Most Asians are killed by other Asians. Most whites are killed by other whites. Most Hispanics are killed by other whites. But there's something that uniquely happens that we have found in our communities. As I stated, that there are, of course, structural and systemic issues, but many of these issues are instigated by outside forces. And that is what is unique in some aspects about the Black community. We don't see this in the Asian community or the white community. But for example, a lot of this is instigated, and sometimes it's instigated by rogue elements within law enforcement. My brother is from California. Of course, if you're familiar with what happened in 1998 with the Rampart police scandal, where the gang task force was involved in extrajudicial killings of gang members and drug dealers, taking Crips, dropping them off in blood territories, taking Bloods, dropping them off in Crip territories. And if we come more recently, CBS LA had an article called LA Sheriff Department has several secret deputy gangs, literally gangs within the LA Police Department. And closer to home, to the good pastor in DC, right outside of Baltimore, of course, in 2015, there was the Baltimore Gun Trace Task Force. This was a task force responsible for taking guns and drugs off of the streets of Baltimore. But what happened is that you had off-duty police officers confiscating cocaine and drugs, but then taking some of those cocaine, some of those drugs, some of those weapons, and actually selling them back on the streets. So that's the reason why I said there is something unique about some aspects of crime and violence in Black and Brown communities, because it is oftentimes instigated by outside forces and rogue elements within law enforcement themselves.
Right.
No doubt. I'll try to chime in quickly. I was having some back problems maybe like 4 years ago, and I was counseled to go to the chiropractor. I go to the chiropractor, they do an x-ray on my back. After the x-ray comes back, the doctor's like, look at your stomach right there. And he's pointing at this like black mass in my stomach. And I'm getting kind of nervous. He's like, what do you think that is? I said, I don't know, doc, you tell me. And he says, that's poop. I was like, what? He was like, yeah, that's poop. And I was like, well, doc, let me tell you, right now I'm on this really aggressive health kick. I'm eating clean, I'm working out. So I'm sure like as I continue to move forward, that'll be dealt with. I know in the past I wasn't taking care of myself like I should, but right now I'm on it, doc. And the doc looked me in the eye and he said, listen, it doesn't matter if you do an organic cleanse, it doesn't matter what you do. The reason for that poop is a structural, there's a structural reason for that poop. He said, you have what's called stair step back. And basically my spine was misaligned. And he said, until that gets aligned, the poop is going to remain. And I think one thing we have to begin to help our people understand and help people across the board understand is that many of the issues we see are due to structures. And until we deal with those structures, the symptoms will remain in place. Yes, there's soul work, all those things are necessary, but there are structures at work that create much of the problems we see. And I'll close with this little quote from Martin Luther King, since everybody loves to quote Martin Luther King. He says, if there is a cultural lag, and this is his language, in the Negro community, the lag is there because of segregation and discrimination. It's there because of long years of slavery and segregation. Criminal responses are not racial, but environmental. Poverty, economic deprivation, social isolation, all these things breed crime, whatever the racial group may be. And it is a torturous logic to use the tragic results of racial segregation as an argument for the continuation of it. And so many today use the tragic results of white supremacy as an argument for why we keep on locking up our folks and not provide any kind of public health policy that gets to the root causes.
Man, which king is that?
1967, where do we go from here? Chapter 4, the king they don't want us to know about.
This pre-McDonald's king. Oh, okay.
Right. It kills me how many public officials quote Dr. King on it throughout Black History Month and on his birthday. And I'm like, y'all, he wasn't for none of this stuff that y'all talking about. Y'all literally taking 2 sentences and putting it on your Facebook profiles. And I'm just like, man, like the audacity that you really have to have, the audacity. But I appreciate y'all framing it and giving us an understanding of how this violence works. I mean, especially that, like Brother Muhammad said, so much of this has been socially constructed, right? The fact that we do not even talk about the Iran-Contra scandal anymore, like that was so wild that happened, that they literally just were allowing cocaine to flow freely from Nicaragua into this country, and then to turn around and pretend as if Black communities were just so addicted to drugs, when we know that white people and Black people use and sell drugs at the same exact rates. And for youth, white youth actually use drugs at higher rates than Black youth. But to pretend as though that was something that was unique to our communities, when they were allowing those drugs to flow here, it's just amazing to me, the amnesia and how fast that comes. So I really want to talk about how, this idea that police are the answer to violence and to crime, right? And I put crime in air quotes because what we consider criminal is definitely socially constructed and definitely racialized, right? What is considered criminal for Black communities is not considered criminal for white communities, right? But I want to talk about the way that it's just it just becomes a taken for granted notion that, of course, more police is going to mean there'll be less violence, right? As if you can have a police officer just walking along with every brother in the community all day, and that's going to solve the problem. So we kind of have that kind of conversation about the ways that we can approach, responding to violence in a way that's more grounded in the community.
May I speak to that just briefly? This is Black History Month, of course. And Brother Malcolm, I think it was in 1963, he stated that, the Black community is one of the most police communities in America. You have large areas of the country, such as Chicago or, certain parts of California, that the police departments have multi-billion-dollar budgets, but yet the crime and the violence continues to escalate. And it goes back to the narrative that is, once again, I have to stay on white supremacy, that believes that Black and brown people are inherently violent. And so if you believe that, then of course you don't want less police on the streets, because who is going to corral these animals? Who's going to make our streets safe? And so many will call for community policing. I think we have to envision what that looks like in terms of community policing. Not more police on the streets or law enforcement on the streets. Of course, law enforcement has a place to play, right? Good law enforcement. However, we have to re-envision community policing from the community policing itself. In East New York, there are members of the Hasidic Jewish community. They literally police their own community. Of course, if there's a need, they reach out to the NYPD if there's a situation, but they have taken on the responsibility to make their community a safe and decent place to live. And that's why grassroots organizations who are involved in the community, we know our communities better often than sometimes law enforcement, because we have a relationship. So Officer McGillicuddy, who lives out in Louisville, may not have the same relationship with a brother Terrence. You understand what I'm saying? And so that's where community policing, I think, comes in, to where we stand up within our communities and go out and offer our brothers and sisters services, because a lot, and I'm sure everyone knows this, a lot of the issues are not really a need for law enforcement. It may be, an issue of hunger, an issue of mental health, an issue of just basic lack of how to communicate with one another that escalates out of hand. And so I just wanted to add another article in terms of, law enforcement. And because this gets missing in the discussion. My teacher, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, said that when we go out into the streets, there are two elements we're going to find. And one of those elements were rogue elements within law enforcement. We talk a lot about the gun violence in our community. But for example, I think it was ABC Fusion had an article from 2014 that talked about military grade guns missing from police departments. This was when the 1033 program out of the Pentagon was sending surplus weaponry to law enforcement all over the country. Law enforcement that was being trained by the mercenary group Blackwater out of North Carolina at the time as well. But what this report found is that many of those guns that were in the possession of law enforcement were going missing. How does 45 walk out of a police precinct? How does an assault weapon walk outside of a law enforcement precinct? And it was so bad, the article points out to where there were several states who were totally suspended from the program. And one of those states was the state of North Carolina. So that makes our work very difficult when those who are supposed to be peace officers are actually involved in breaking the peace. So just as the community and law enforcement call for the community to end the no snitching, we also have to make a call for law enforcement to end the blue code of silence. So this is a time for good law enforcement who really want to protect and serve to stand up and purge from within their ranks those rotten apples. And so I think that becomes difficult when those departments with those rotten apples have inflated budgets, because those budgets, just make those rotten apples get bigger.
Right. And we know that the opportunity for those types of rogue elements is happening right here in Winston and Forsyth County, right? So we know currently the city and the county are in a collaborative relationship to have a drug task force, right? And they have just entered into a 10-year lease for a warehouse that was described publicly during a council meeting as being located in the cloak of darkness. And that is a quote. Being located in the cloak of darkness, right? It's as if they're playing some video game and they think that, policing in a military style is just, like a fun project. And so, as I spoke to Brother Muhammad about the other day, what do we think they're putting in that warehouse, right? What do we think is going into that warehouse, and what do we think types of opportunities that provides for police, for law enforcement, sheriff's deputies to have access to guns and drugs, right? In the cloak of darkness in Winston-Salem. So our tax dollars are going to pay for something and we can't even know where it is, where it's located, right? Or what the bounds, the scope of this project is in this community. Does anybody else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I was just going to add that even in my community, this may have happened in Forsyth. One of the things that I've noticed is whenever there's a crisis, especially around drug use, white supremacy reveals itself like overtly. And I can't think of a way that it revealed itself most overtly was when people were at a heightened alert around the opioid crisis. I don't know if some of y'all remember that. And in our community, when that began to hit, when white folks were showing up, driving cars, ODing in the open public in the middle of the day, dying right there in front of children and families, and then they were beginning to say, we got to have a systemic approach, a system of care around, we got to have wraparound services, right? We can't criminalize these people. We got to bring in social services. We got to bring in the county. We got to bring in the city together. Then they begin to have these conversations around holistic care around those who are caught up in that. That conversation did not happen in the 80s, didn't happen in the 90s. And it's hard to even have that conversation now. Even with some of us, those of us who are in activist circle around abolishing the carceral state and defunding the police, they were engaging in actions that we've been calling for within our own community for decades. Don't criminalize us, right? And so this is something that speaks to the fact that institutionally, part of the challenge is, and I'm just going to say it, some of this stuff won't be addressed until we seize political power in our communities, right? There's ways that, we've been talking about taking, dismantling the carceral state, addressing the way funding's allocated in our community. If there's no political will there for that, right, that's not going to happen. And so literally what needs to happen is the structural change, and part of that is literally changing the political algebra in your own community.
Mm-hmm.
If I could jump in and just one local example, Brother Ephraim Gwan will immediately know what I'm talking about. I can't think back to the exact amount of years back it's been. However, there was this practice of these random traffic stops where the police will be posted up strategically in certain communities to do license checks and all that kind of stuff, registration checks and all of that. And we know they were basically fishing to find, more than perhaps a suspended license, more than an expired registration card. They were fishing in specific neighborhoods to hopefully find drugs, guns, things of that nature in cars, find folks with warrants that are driving. And I got caught up in that quite a few times, getting off on that Watown exit, going down Martin Luther King Drive, got caught up in it plenty of times. A lot of times it would be, expired registration, license expired because my registration expired. I didn't have enough money to fix all that. So you see this like long winding road that poverty and all these elements put somebody in, and then the police show up and they aren't a system of care. They're a system of punishment. They're a system that's designed actually to make things worse. And so, it didn't matter if, Johnny, put on his badge that morning and had the greatest intentions of being a quote unquote peace officer. Mm-hmm. He was a part of a system that was sending him out to do specific things that were disproportionately impacting Black and brown Winston-Salem. And I would say policing as a system is violent, and it's not designed for healing or care or restoration or reparations or any of those things. And so it's important, as Brother Ephraim Gwan was alluding to, that on the ground in our communities, we do relationally based work that gets down at the roots of some of these conflicts, that gets down at the roots of some of the drama and things that pop off in our communities. And we can do that better than anybody else. I think violence interruption work shows, has demonstrated, it's got the numbers to demonstrate that when grassroots community folks are given the resources, and even when they don't have the resources, and they're able to build within their community and get information on things that are going down and to do follow-ups and to be a bridge towards resources, you see crime go down drastically. Whereas when the police come, all they can really do is handcuff and cage. They're not equipped, designed in any way, shape, or form to bring healing, care, restoration. And so I think we have to think beyond this whole institution of policing to our own systems of care.
Right. So someone is asking in the Facebook comments, so what do we do, right? And how do we do it? What are the new ways that we can address these issues in our communities? And y'all are all doing this work in some type of way. So can we jump into more talking specifically about like what these policies look like, what these programs look like, what the actual work of doing, violence prevention and intervention looks like?
So one of the things that we did through the LOC beginning several years ago, actually we began through the mosque because every Monday night we have a manhoods training program called FOI. And the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan called us out of the mosque, and he said, we have to come out of our mosque, come out of our churches and get into the streets where the despair is, where the hopelessness is. And so beginning in, I think, 2012, 2013, we began to go through various areas of the city. But we wanted to extend that beyond the mosque. And through the LOC, we invited the greater community to get involved with our 10,000 Fearless. And within that 10,000 Fearless, we offered the only requirement is that you have to have a love for Black and brown people, right? You have to have a love. That's the first requirement. You have to have a love for our people, right? And so we offer training in conflict resolution, self-improvement. Of course, we can't hope to affect any change in our community unless it starts with self-improvement, which is the basis for community development. So we offered conflict resolution training. We wanted to make sure anyone that was going out on the peace walks had basic first aid, understanding of CPR, basic self-defense. And so we began to go into areas, and we would get data, as we still get data, because every community has this unique set of circumstances, right? So if we go into an area and there's a lot of break-ins, there's a lot of burglaries, armed robberies. So what drives our conversation is thou shalt not steal. So if we go into another area and there's a lot of homicide, a lot of killing, what drives our conversation is thou shalt not kill. But what we strive to do is to go in and to empower the community, because in every community, generally there is a big homie that everybody else looks up to, right? Or there may be a big mama on the block or a big uncle on the block. So finding those individuals and encouraging them to get involved in their community. And so our desire has always been to set up conflict resolution centers. So whenever there are issues that happen in the community, as opposed to getting on the phone and calling 911, you can call those individuals within your community who went through the training to de-escalate that situation. We started a Squash the Beef hotline, where if there were incidents in the community, individuals could call in and we could try to mediate beefs before they get out of hand. And so we're getting prepared to revamp some of those services that we offered as we go into the spring and the summer months. So I think, COVID-19 has made it challenging because you have to socially distance, but I think there are ways that we still can be creative in empowering the community, because once the community begins to hold itself accountable, then there's no need for law enforcement to come into our community to risk these hostile interactions between citizens and law enforcement. So those are efforts that we've done over the years. There's another brother I've worked with, Brother David Vallada, and we just initiated several months ago. We were blessed to initiate a gang truce on the South Side between certain Hispanic gang members. And we believe that it definitely impacted some of what was heating up, throughout the city. If you recall, going into July, we were having killings of young people almost like every day in Winston-Salem. And so we got together and said, look, we got to put boots back on the ground. And so what we need, and I'm sure Brother Pastor Delonte can testify to this, it works. But the problem is that we need more funding and resources to expand the training and expand the man and woman power. It's great for people to say, hey, that's great, Brother Muhammad, what you all are doing, and get a like on social media. No, we don't need that. We need for you to get involved, or if you're not going to get involved, support us by writing a check so that we can get the type of equipment we need, so that we can get houses and rehab them within those communities, turn them into resource houses there right in the community, and then move over to the other side of town and duplicate that and have that community responsible for it. So it can be done. In 1988 and 1999, just real quick, at the height of the drug war, brothers from within the Nation of Islam, the FOI, went into one of the worst areas of Washington, D.C., Mayfair Mansions, right? And unarmed. And because of our respect, because of the love from the community, we were able to essentially eliminate crime in that area. So much so until many of the Black local politicians say, when the brothers come, it's peaceful. The elderly can come out on their porch, the children can go to the park, but when you all leave, then the violence comes back. So the brothers created private security companies, and the citizens pushed for them to get contracts through HUD. And it was a model program But once again, there were forces from the outside who interfered with that model because, of course, when crime goes down, you're now affecting someone's budget, right? So I just wanted to say that that's some of the work that we have been doing, striving to do in Forsyth County. But, as Brother Terrence and Brother Anthony can attest, we just need a little bit more help in terms of resources. I mean, putting checks and finances behind it. There are a lot of nonprofits that get inflated budgets, but to be honest, they're not doing a damn thing.
Right.
But yet there are people who are on this call who have boots on the ground that if we were received a little bit more love, we could do some wonderful work. And that's not that's outside of what law enforcement does. In fact, it would make their jobs easier.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just going to add that on in connection with what Brother Efferwin said. Some of the work that we've been doing, especially in the last couple of years, we've been very intentional in creating a seedbed for young, thoughtful, conscientious political leaders, budding political leaders, those who want to go into the world to change policy in our communities. Because quite frankly, when people say, what can we do? One of the things you can do is change the weather. And by change the weather, what I mean is, I noticed when Brother Delonte was talking about some of the services that the city and even these really innovative programming around, even the way they were framing around safety, there had to be political leadership at the table to change that. And so a lot of us in our context here in Southern cities, people are going to have to be very intentional in electing public officials who have a frame, who have an understanding, a more systemic understanding of poverty and violence in our communities. We have too many political leaders in our own communities that have a very individualistic, a very status quo understanding, a very ill and warped understanding of how communities work and the relationship between violence and wealth inequality and all of that. And so part of the work is you're going to have to create a seedbed. You're going to have to groom, create a pipeline to cultivate young people or leaders in your community to seize political power, to change these budgets and allocate resources in the community in a way that addresses the issues. Until we deal with that, until we change the weather, it'll be like going outside. You see a tornado coming down the street. That's like going outside saying, let's pick up the lawn chairs.
Right.
That ain't gonna stop the tornado. So we got to literally seize political power. So part of that work is to make people aware, to raise consciousness, to let people know you have power in your community. We don't have an absence of power. It's just a lack of use of political power in our community. That's what needs to happen. That's one of the things that need to happen. And we got to talk about that. And I don't care if they Black and they come in my community and say, I want to be on city council. How do you think about the causes of violence in your community? Are you into defunding the police? Are you into allocating resources to create systems of care? Well, I think that poor people need to make better choices and they all need to go to church and read the Lord's Prayer and become better moral people. Then no, we are not voting for you.
Period.
Just because you pray in Jesus' name and because you look like me, we're not voting for you. We're going to vote for the person, whoever that is, that's talking right.
All right, Reverend.
I'm sorry.
I don't know what else I can add. All I would say, I guess the only frame I would offer is we need to recognize and realize that either or thinking is white supremacist thinking.
Yes.
And I guess one of the things that I feel like movement work has been deeply paralyzed by is this notion that if I get engaged in the political process, then I'm somehow tainted.
Right. I'm
too woke to get involved while our people are being killed. I'm too woke to get involved in the political process while our people are dying on the street. Now, unless you're doing like my brother over here, Brother Muhammad, and is actually organizing a literal army from the FOI to do security in our community, you need to shut up and get somebody elected who can get resources to our communities that can actually help us keep our folks safe. Because if we don't have the capacity got to come from somewhere. And it's got to come from government, because that's our money, that's our tax dollars we paying. It's got to come from the nonprofit sector. Again, that's us. All right. And if it needs to come from business, it got to come from, it needs to come from wherever it needs to come from. All right. I'll take Bezos. I don't care, I don't care how they made it. It needs to find its way into the streets to impact our communities. That doesn't mean that we need to be, out here, I want to be careful with the language I use. That doesn't mean we need to be out here, street hustling out here, reinventing capitalism. That's not what I'm talking about. But the work must be funded. Yeah. So number one, we need to get out of this either or thinking this, we too woke to actually get engaged. Number two, I would say we need to do some research. We need to understand that if there was a war on drugs, if the war was the problem, right, then peace has got to be the answer, right? If the problem was a war on drugs, then the cure has got to be. I use the frame from warfare to healthcare, that we have to use a public health approach to ending gun violence. And so we need to do some research. What does it mean for violence to be a public health issue? What are the social determinants of public health? Roll up your sleeves, open the book, go online, look on the internet, Google public health, and figure out what are the determinants, you know what I'm saying? What is, how do we deal with poverty? How do we deal with employment? How do we deal with housing? How do we deal with education? How do we deal with mental health? How do we deal with trauma? Like we gotta do a little bit of this work is understanding what actually causes violence. But then the third thing, I guess, is we got to organize. We got to organize. And the vision that I really stand behind as it relates to organizing is getting the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement in your city that can really begin to get the data and get the resources out of the police department. And then at least you have somewhere for it to go to, right? Mm-hmm. That can start to do that coordination and mobilization in the community. So I'm hoping that those are some practical ways. Change your mind, your ways of thinking, do some research, and find yourself an Office of Neighborhood Safety, Office of Neighborhood Safety or Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. We call it ones, whatever you want to call it. That's at least one target to kind of push for in your city as you push for a reinvest, reimagine platform.
Yeah. And I would just say, we have to understand the difference between peacemaking and peacekeeping. As many would say, peacekeeping is about sweeping the problem under the rug. The carceral state is about sweeping problems under the rug, sweeping people who are viewed as problems into a cage. I call it the devil's lair, and nobody gets healed in the devil's lair, right? Peacemaking says, let's pull up the rug and confront the ugliness so that we can actually heal and overcome it. And so violence interrupters are doing peacemaking work. They're literally showing up on the ground where there is heightened potential for violence and de-escalating, letting cooler heads prevail, getting down to the roots of what's going on in an individual's life. So instead of handcuffs, okay, come with me, let's go eat, and let's get you linked up with some healthcare, with some mental health care. Let's get you linked up with a job. Let's get you linked up with a community that's gonna come alongside of you. And you'd be surprised how often that literally will revolutionize someone's life. Michelle Alexander said that when you look at violent crime, and you compare the data for joblessness, Black, brown, white, purple, orange folks commit violent crimes at roughly the same rates. So what would it look like to create job programs with livable wages, right? With mentorships around that? Those are just some of the kind of things that we can do that really get at the root. And the last thing I say, as someone that does youth development work, is support youth workers, support the organizations, not these white savior organizations that come in and individualize the problem and look at our people as problems to be solved versus like wonderful image of God bearing people who have gifts that need to, be nurtured. But fund those that are on the ground in the community, have a political analysis, and also understand the soul level work. And they're trying to wed those two approaches together. Because like Brother Delonte said, it's not an either or, it's the both and. It's soul systems, it's policy change and individual change. It's political organizing and mental health. All these things need to be brought together. And if we had the money, we could do it in a way that legit could transform our city.
Just very quick, I would just add, make sure you take care of your interrupters.
Yeah.
All right. They need to be paid well. They need to have mental health breaks. They need to have therapy. They need to be taken care of. And don't over romanticize violence interruption work as though the people who are going into violence interruption work are somehow infallible people. Because here's what will happen: the moment that you have an interrupter get arrested, the moment that you have an interrupter get shot, it'll eat into the credibility of your work. It's going to happen, okay? Because it's vulnerable people trying to police vulnerable people. So we have to make sure that we are building up capacity within our interruption spaces, interruption circles, and also just creating an honest narrative around the fact that just because people are credible in a community doesn't mean that they're not invulnerable to issues any more, any less than cops slip up every now and then. You're going to have an interrupt. It's going to have an issue. Call them in before you call them out, and just work with them is what I'm saying. I don't want us to, in this conversation, over romanticize interruption work as a panacea, as though they are perfect. Because again, perfectionism is also white supremacist thinking. So let's just be kind of clear about that, and know that these brothers and sisters, they can do amazing work. But it's going to take a village. It's really going to take that village to hold all of us into account when we do slip up, when we do fall, to get back up again and keep the work moving forward. I just want to make sure I add that piece. That's a really important piece.
I think what y'all just pointed out with talking about how we can, how this work can be done, is that the movement is multidimensional. And folks who are with us on the ground during Occupy WSNC this summer have heard me say this a million times, right? The movement is multidimensional in that, what can you do? You have to figure out what you want to do first, right? Because there's so many different directions that you can get involved in this work, from the individual level, doing work like the violence interrupting type of programs on an interpersonal one-on-one level. There's also work that needs to be done on the systems, right? And attacking those issues, like Brother Smith pointed out, from the root, right? We have to build political capacity, right? We have to be making sure our voices are heard on city council and county commissioner meetings, right? At the local level, it's so, even me, up until a few years ago, you don't realize how crucial local politics are. They are making the decisions about how your neighborhoods are policed. Literally, they are making those decisions. The decisions that are made in city council meetings can determine whether or not your little brother gets picked up for smoking a blunt. Like, literally, that's the way that those decisions can impact you on an individual level. And so folks have to really just figure out how they want to get tapped in, right? And so Forsyth County Police Accountability and Reallocation Committee is working on a bunch of ways for folks to get tapped into doing this work. We're consistently speaking to city council and county commissioners. Matter of fact, tomorrow we'll be back at the Public Safety Committee meeting for Winston-Salem City Council, talking about the demands that we have about around police accountability and reallocation. And one of the things that we're calling for is for the grassroots organizations, the folks who are on the ground in Winston-Salem and Forsyth County doing this work, to be funded. There's no reason that police should be making $70,000, $80,000, $90,000, and they are supposed to be fighting crime when there are folks who are doing this work for free, right? And not being taken care of, as Pastor Valente just pointed out, right? Like, not getting that support and those resources. So we have to make sure our voices are heard. So make sure, y'all, if this sounds like things that y'all can get behind, make sure you sign this petition that we've been working on for the past several weeks around our 5 demands. One is reallocation. The city council, the WSPD budget is $78 million. That's a lot of money, y'all. That's a lot of money to not really be making big changes that they claim that they're making, right? When we have folks who are doing work for free, right? Arranging truces that is drastically reducing violence in our community, and they're doing that work for free. So that's important. The reallocation piece is important. We are also calling for the demilitarization of the WSPD and the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office. We should not have law enforcement who are entering our communities with military style weapons, nor should they be approaching our communities in military style combat thought processes, right? So part of what we have to do is abolish the police inside our own minds that thinks that it's appropriate for our communities to be engaged with in such a brutal manner, right? For no reason, all of the time. And we saw that happening in Winston-Salem when this young 15-year-old girl was slammed to the ground, right, for trespassing. And so, we're working on things like ending cash bail in the county, getting a mental health crisis intervention unit that would call for mental health practitioners to respond to 911 calls when there's issues around mental health, and not have the police show up, because we know police with guns who are trained to be violent escalate those situations, and we don't want to wait until someone gets hurt or killed in Winston-Salem or Forsyth County to make those changes. So definitely make sure y'all show up to the public safety meeting tomorrow. It's at 6 o'clock. It live streams on the Winston-Salem free access channel. Sign our petition. I'm sure folks are dropping that in the chat right now. And if you really are looking for more ways to get directly involved, send us an email, and we can say, as Pastor Delonte said, research has to be done, right? And that's one thing that we're heavy trying to do with the Forsyth County Police Accountability and Reallocation Coalition, is making sure we have those numbers, right? And have the dollar figures, the statistics around what it would look like to do some of these programs in Winston-Salem. So a lot of that work has been done. We have all of that information. We've shared it with city council members, with county commissioners. And now it's the responsibility of the community to say, hey, y'all are not going to continue to ignore us, right? And y'all are not going to continue to pretend as though we want to be policed in this way. They will kill us and say we enjoyed it if we don't speak out against it, right? So we have to make sure that we're using our voices to be heard. So I appreciate y'all for being on this call. And do y'all have any final words that y'all want to share about the work that you're doing, or calls to action for folks who are listening?
Just one thing I want to add, a lot of this work also comes down to the work of the imagination.
That's right.
Right. And that work is about shifting the narrative in our own communities.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we began this practice of having a mock city council meeting in our community, where we literally have people who play the mayor, deputy mayor, what we call mayor pro tem here, city council members. And the last one that we did, we imagined the congressional bill that Congressman John Lewis was trying to put forth with many others around reparations. We imagined a world where that had passed. Mm-hmm. And we imagined a city council who was trying to bring forth progressive policy and distribution of resources in the community to fund the very things that some of y'all are talking about. And so we begin to engage this practice, because a lot of times people they can't see, like they what would it look like that when we had mostly young Black folk who were on city council. We had a sister who was the mayor, who was 20 years old, and they're leading and they're passing policy and laws not laws, but policy to shift distribution of resources in a very institutional structural way. And so part of that work is we're going to have to get creative in how we challenge people's imagination. Just giving facts alone, just giving straight theory is good, but we got to find ways to engage in theater, the arts, and music to shift the imagination.
Yeah.
First of all, I just wanted to say in conclusion, I want to thank you, Sister Brittany, for the work that you have been doing over the last several months in the city of Winston-Salem, the young people with you and the team that's with you and the coalition of organizations. That's inspiring because a lot of us, we have a few gray hairs or less hair. And so we've been in this for a while. So it's always good to see younger people get into the battle. And so keep in that fight, because you're fighting a righteous fight. And if you're fighting a righteous fight, God is on the side of the righteous. So I thank you. And I think we all have to stay connected. No little I's, no big U's. I'm inspired by every brother and everyone on the call, and we have to stay connected and learn from one another, lower our egos and learn from one another. Pastor Anthony came down and observed what they were doing, the wonderful work of the night crawlers, what drum makers is doing. Brother Terrence, I love him. That's my other brother. And then meeting Pastor Delante to know he's doing peace walks in DC. As we're doing peace walks here, so we can learn from one another and definitely connect with the brothers in Baltimore, Brother Andrew Muhammad and the group that they're working with, interfaith group of Black men and those who don't have any faith at all, but have a love for our community. So we have to stay connected. And I thank you, Sister Brittany, for bringing us together. And, this is Black History Month. And we, as I think Pastor Anthony said, or Brother Terrence said, we have to read. If you know me, I'm going to plug a book. And this is a book written by one of my brothers. He's a part of our he's a part of our historical research department. His name is Demetrius Muhammad. You can go to researchminister.com. And this is a book of information called How to Police the Black Community. In fact, I'm going to send this, God willing, to Chief Katrina Thompson and Sheriff Kimbrough. But I think it's something that serves as a good model to see some of the work that has been done in the community and what good community law enforcement relationship can look like, especially with our Black law enforcement officers. So I just wanted to plug that. Thank you.
There's a quote I stumbled across. I don't know its origin, but the person said, "Let everyone work for liberation in their own way. I would help all and hinder none." And so all of us have a unique role, a unique piece to add to the struggle. And let's just support one another, love one another, and continue to spur one another along towards freedom and flourishing in our communities. To that end, around imagination, political education, the Drum Majors Alliance is doing a series of events for Black History Month. We're calling it A More Beautiful and Radical History. Two things I want to plug real quick. On the 19th, we're doing a showing of the film Judas and the Black Messiah, which chronicles COINTELPRO's infiltration into the Chicago Black Panther Party and the assassination of Chairman Fred Hampton, an incredible organizer. And so we're going to do that showing, and our city is blessed to be the first Black Panther Party chapter of the South. And so we've got 2 so far former Black Panther Party chapter members who will be there and sharing their thoughts, not only on the film, but what we can do to organize in the present. And then on February 28th, we're doing a freedom ride. Normally our freedom rides are like on a bus, but Rona is wreaking havoc. And so we can't do that, but we're gonna do a virtual freedom ride, which basically tells the story of our city from the perspective of Black folks, starting with our entrance into this land now known as Winston-Salem as enslaved people to the present. And so if you check out Drum Majors Alliance, I'll post a link in the chat. And thank y'all. Thanks, Britt. Thanks to the coalition. It's an honor to work with y'all.
Thank you.
This was such an encouragement to my heart and to my soul. This is hard work, and it's just always good and refreshing to know that others are doing the work and are serious about it. There's a passage in the Bible, the book of Philemon, that just says, "You refresh my heart," and the Greek word that's used is this word splankna, and it actually goes back to what Terrence was saying, because the word for heart in splankna, that word, it means gut. Like you literally this conversation has literally got down into my gut and has refreshed me. And so I'm just so grateful. Anything y'all need, I don't know it all. I don't have all the answers. I forgot to tell you, I do serve on the Police Reform Commission in DC that's putting together a series of recommendations that we're coming out with in March. So if anything that I'm learning here, I can share. DC actually is a bit farther along than a lot of cities as it relates to a transformation agenda. We're not by far not there yet. A lot of work to be done. But if there's anything that I can do to just, I don't mind coming down. I got my brother lives in Rocky Mount, you know what I'm saying? I got family in Durham. So ain't nothing for me to get on the road. So just let me know and I'm there. Appreciate y'all, fam. Be encouraged.
Appreciate y'all so much. I appreciate this conversation. Folks that y'all are watching, you'll see us back in a couple weeks with another conversation. Stay tapped in, follow Hate Out of Winston, Drum Majors Alliance, Triad Abolition Project on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, to keep up to date with what's happening with the coalition here in the county. And definitely, you know, as you've been encouraged, find a way to get tapped into the work. There's a way that we all can, you know, move from the way that we're called and led to contribute to Black liberation, because it's going to take all of us to make this load lighter and to make the goal actually achievable. So I appreciate y'all. Take care, and y'all have a good night. Be safe.
Thanks. You too.
Thank you.